Hey everybody, welcome to If They Did, I Can. Beverly here. So today I thought I'd brave the cold outside because I've got a very exciting story for you today. I'm talking about and sharing the story of Leonhard Seppala. Leonhard Seppala. So get ready, fasten your seatbelts, we're going to Alaska. So Leonhard Seppala was born in Norway in 1877. Now, though he was born in Norway, he was of Finnish descent. So he lived there, and in Norway, and his father was a pretty good fisherman and blacksmith, and actually had built up quite an estate there. And so naturally, Leonhard was going to follow in his footsteps. But then in 1900, it sounds so funny to say 1900, doesn't it? But in 1900, Leonhard's friend, Lindeberg, that was his second name, Lindeberg, he returned home from Alaska, and he said, "Hey Leonhard, I got a job for you. Come work for me in Alaska in my mining business." Because at that point, in that time in Alaska, in Nome, Alaska, there was a gold rush. A gold rush was happening, and so anyway, Leonhard took him up on the offer, and off he went to Alaska. Now, actually, Leonhard did go on to become a naturalized citizen before 1917, so that was pretty cool. But anyway, during his first winter in Alaska, Lindeberg gave him the job of dog sledding, taking this dog sled, and actually training this first team up. Now the team wasn't for Leonhard himself, but it was hoping that they would be used for this guy's race or some expedition. But anyway, the expedition ended up getting cancelled, and Leonhard got gifted all the dogs, which he was so delighted about because he had fallen in love with those dogs. Those dogs were like family to him. So it's pretty cool here today. But imagine the temperatures in Alaska, in Nome, Alaska. So anyway, Leonhard, he got the job with the dogs, and he inherited the dogs, and he found his calling. The first day, it's recalled at him saying, this is not a direct quote, but basically what he said, the rhythmic patter of the dog's feet on the snow and the sled gliding through that snow, it just did something for Leonhard, and it clicked. He'd found his calling. He'd found his purpose. And the dogs, they were family to him. They weren't just work animals. They were family to him. So over the years, he began, obviously doing the trail runs, and he became known as the best musher in the Northlands. He'd won the Alaska. There was this special, amazing race, and he'd won it a few times, him and his team. And Togo was his lead dog that he loved. Now, Togo, actually, he was not the pick of the litter with dogs. He was actually, as a puppy, he was, smaller than size, and he didn't, you wouldn't even consider him to be on a team, never mind the lead dog. But, Togo himself was persistent to be on that team. And Leonhard Seppala, he was like, okay, I'll give you a shot. And he actually became the very lead dog that Seppala, was believing for in his heart. So a great team, a great combination they made. Anyway, over the years, they worked together, and by the time 1925 swung around, Seppala was 47 years old, and Togo, he was 12 years old. So basically, they were reaching the prime. They had passed their prime for sledding and racing and what you would expect. But unfortunately, 1925. In Nome. Now, Nome was really an isolated place in Alaska. In 1925, tragedy struck. An outbreak of diphtheria was wanting to spread. It was wanting to spread in the area. There are 10,000 plus residents around that area. But children were the ones that were susceptible most to this strand of diphtheria. And remember, back in the time, hopefully this mic doesn't go, but the doctor and his wife, they had a couple of cases, and they really didn't want to voice their concerns. They didn't want to acknowledge that this could be diphtheria. But one more case came in, and they couldn't deny it, so they had to let everyone know. And Nome basically became the quarantine town. And the doctor himself, he had some reserves of the antitoxin, but it turns out It definitely wasn't enough to go around, and it turns out his antitoxin supplies were 5 years past their expiry date. He was not going to use them. Well, this is a bit warmer. Let's continue with the story. So an antitoxin was desperately needed for the people, especially for the children at Nome. Now, the word doctor had already sent a request out for 1 million vials of it, I believe, but the best they could do was get some of the antitoxin by rail to the closest town, which was Nenanen, I believe, which was actually 674 miles from Nome. Now, the weather was crazy. It was wild. There was a blizzard coming. So there's no way any sort of aircraft would make it, would be allowed to make it. And the only way to pick up this antitoxin and get it back to Nome was by the dog sled teams. So they mushered up 20 mushers, 20 teams, men and their dogs, to take the antitoxin from like the train to a middle point, and then Seppala would come from Nome and meet them at the middle point. Initially, he was going to be traveling 400 miles return, and he was taken because he was the most experienced, maybe not the most experienced, I don't know for sure, but I know he was the most venerated and recognized as the best in the Northlands at that time in Alaska. He was recognized as the best. And obviously he was getting on, but he was given the task of the most arduous part of the journey. Now, what made it so hard, made it so difficult and life-threatening, apart from the normal surroundings as it was for every member of the team, every team, they did an amazing job. All the dogs, all the teams, all the men, everybody did their part. They did an amazing job, and we're all to be recognised in this mission. But today we're talking about Seppala and his dog Togo and his team. So they were given this part of the journey, and it involved crossing the Norton Sound. Now, the Norton Sound was an inlet off the Bering Sea. Oh boy, it was treacherous. So obviously it was iced up at this point in time, and as Seppala himself, he had crossed it a couple of times in his life, but definitely it took an experienced musher with his team, because it was just a click of the fingers and the musher and the team would be plunged into icy water, and the serum along with it. Anyway, so here we go. Seppala sets off on his run, ready to meet the other musher coming from the other way. So he gets to the Norton Sound and he crosses it without incident, and he's at the other side. Now, the weather, it's rough. And let me tell you a wee bit about the Norton Sound, actually. So the ice on the Norton Sound, it's like smashed up ice, so it could be like really rough and unstable. And then on the other side, it, like the other side of the coin, it could be like really glazed and well polished by the wind, where the dogs would have trouble finding their footing. It was treacherous, and small gaps in the ice could suddenly just widen and create a massive plunge hole that the sled and the dogs, the team, could fall into at no problem. Also, then you had the gale force winds that would push the dogs off course and could flip the sleigh on its side. And you think that's if that wasn't bad enough, the wind chill could get up to -100 Fahrenheit. The Norton Sound was no place for anyone, really. Anyway, and so once across it, in the first part of his journey, on the way there, Seppala still, believed he had a good lot to go. I think he had travelled 160 miles at this point, over a couple of days. But anyway, the authorities of, the organisers of the run, they had to speed things up a bit, because there were some more cases getting reported and things weren't great, they added more mushers in, you know, so that meant like fresh men, fresh teams and such. Sorry, jerked the camera there. But obviously there was no way to communicate that to Seppala, so he didn't know that the next rider, the person carrying the serum, the next musher would be closer than expected. So gosh, you had to pray for a miraculous meetup, and that's actually what happened. So Henry Ivanhoff, he was the next musher that was coming with the serum. Now his dogs, he was on this, he was caught, and all of a sudden something happens and his dogs got caught in something. I don't know whether they ran into a reindeer or what happened, but he was off his sled and he was stopped in the trail, and there comes Seppala. Amazingly enough, here comes Seppala. Look, it was windy, it's a mess, but it happens they actually are on the same bit of the trail at the same time, and they went the same part. But Seppala, of course, he's on an urgent mission, so he's not going to stop and chat. He just races on by. But Ivanhoff runs after him, shouting, the serum, it's here. And thankfully to the keen sense of the dogs, the Seppala stops and he grabs the serum, he gets the serum and immediately does an about turn. Now Seppala's on his return journey. They've already travelled like hundreds of miles. Just like the dogs, like make note, like he ends up travelling like about 200 miles more like than anyone else. That's his journey, you know. That's why we're talking about him in this story today. But here at this point, he has a decision to make. It's dark, it's night, the winds are howling, it's desperate weather. Is he going to go around, take the journey around the Norton Sound, or is he going to go back across it? He has to make the decision. He can't stop for hours in one spot here. So what's he going to do? Well, if he goes around it, it's going to add another day to the journey. So he's not going to do that. So he heads on, and he trusts the dogs. He trusts the dogs for the journey, and they make it. And they cross over and they arrive at Isaac's Point, I believe it's called, the roadhouse. So they arrive there. The dogs, I think, have done 84 miles, 84 miles non-stop. So they rest up there, but they really only can rest a few hours. And at 2 a.m. and pitch black, they set out again to reach the final part of their journey. So they set out again and they follow like on the Norton Sound, on the ice, and they follow the shoreline. So what's great is they do avoid like the rockiness of the shoreline, but still they're in the tempestuous, what a word, part of the Norton Sound. They make it across, and literally a few hours after they make it across, the ice is like completely broken up and disappeared. That's how close a call it was. Anyway, you think that was the most hardest part done, but remember the dogs are tired, Seppala's tired, and they have a 8-mile ridge now to climb, an 8-mile ridge to get to the next checkpoint. And they press on and they make it. Seppala hands over the serum, and the next guy takes it on. And because of that, like the next two men have it. Like 2 men finished the last, I think it was like 78 miles between 2 men, and the arduous conditions and arduous weather, but they make it and they get the serum delivered, and success. You know, Seppala, I was just want to read you a wee quote in his own words, so I'm going to read it because it's just great. So Seppala, he said this like years later. Afterwards, I thought of the ice and the darkness and the terrible wind and the irony that men could build planes and ships, but when Nome needed life in little packages of serum, it took dogs to bring it through. You know, Seppala loved his dogs. He loved being a sled driver, a musher. And he was glad to do his part. Seppala was just a man. He just did his part. He didn't let anything stop him. If he did, you can. You know, let's just take a moment. And this year, like, even especially, let's just take a moment to honour and give thanks to all the healthcare workers, because like Seppala, like those other men and their teams, like the doctor there, they were fighting against a plague, so to speak. They were wanting to bring aid to save people's lives, and there's so many people today in our lives, 2020, 2021, have done the same. They've stepped up. They've just done normal things to them, and but such a superhero thing to do, you know. So anyway, I'm just going to pray now. Father, I just thank you for everyone that has stepped up to the mark and are doing their best to help people. And Father, for those listening and watching this story, that their eyes will be opened, that they would see you and know you. In Jesus' name. So, you know, Seppala and his love, and Togo, obviously, his love for the Siberian Husky. Because of him, the Siberian Husky then became a familiar dog in the USA and Canada. And actually, you can get a form of it, a breed line of it, Seppala's Siberian sled dog, that's highly sought after. So he went on ahead to live till a ripe old age, I believe it was 89. And he finished out his days in Alaska. So today, whatever it is that you have in your heart, you know, he found his calling. He found the thing that made him tick. He used to live in Norway, and here he moved to Alaska. He just took a step and did something, and there, Alaska, he found dog sledding. And he was just training because someone asked him to do this. The dogs end up becoming his, and he discovered his purpose, the thing that made him tick. So today I just want to encourage you to go ahead and just keep walking forward. And you will discover, if you haven't already, the thing that makes you tick, your destiny and your purpose. Remember, if they did, I can. See you next time.